Taking notes is the most important part of studying, working, and gathering important information. I, like many others, perform better when I take down notes. But not all notes actually work. Let me show you a way to take down notes in order to be able to memorize and remember them whenever you need them in the best way possible. Hello and welcome here. I'm Hamza Al Khatib, a fourth year dental student, and I've been making videos for some time now. I love making videos about iPads, productivity, and studying in general. If you are interested, make sure to subscribe. In order to take down notes efficiently, you first need to understand what you are actually note taking. If you take down notes without understanding the topic itself, the notes are useless before you even start. The best way to counter this is to go over the material before your lecture. While studying the lecture, I focus on what the professor is saying rather than just mindlessly writing every word the doctor says. This way, I actually understand what is being taught. After every minute or so, I stop down to write down my notes. There is no fancy way for this, you just write down what you understood in a minimal form so that you don't have many pages to go through at the end of your lecture. Write your note in your own words, not like the same as the professor said, so that you have the general idea of what the lecture was about and leave out all the little details that wouldn't really matter. The way I take down my notes is similar to the Cornell system, but it is still different. I take down my notes in a combination of paragraphs and bullet points. And if something I didn't understand, I still write it down, but with a mark so that I know I should go back to it at the end of my notes, or I should revise it at a later time. I like to keep my paragraphs short. A paragraph usually doesn't cover more than 10 minutes of the lecture. But at the same time, I don't want the paragraph to cover less than 5 minutes of the lecture. I feel like the 10-minute mark is a perfect balance between all. But still, it is different from lecture to the other. But with this way, I can keep my paragraphs short and concise without taking many pages. Notes will never truly cover everything you have in the lecture or the material itself, but I like to keep my notes in a simple way, that if I need any information from the notes itself, I can easily find them. But let's say there are some missing information and I need to go to the lecture itself. Well, I like to keep my notes in an organized form so that if I need anything from the lecture, I can use my notes to be able to pinpoint which part of the lecture I actually need to rewatch or which part of the lecture I need to restudy again from the book or from any other external resources. If I plan to restudy the lecture itself from the notes only, I always leave a little bit of space in the page itself. This way, if I need to add any extra information or any questions that I need to answer to myself through resources and the lecture itself, I always have the ability to write it down so that I don't forget it and it is always in an organized form so that I can always pinpoint back to it. When it comes to note taking, there are two ways in which you can take down notes. There is a digital way by typing, or there is the old school way using a pen and paper. I personally prefer pen and paper. I prefer the paper for many reasons, starting with focus and retention of the information itself that I am note taking. When I write on paper, I feel disconnected from all the noises of social media. This in itself helps me focus for longer periods of time, but also not having any notifications popping up while I'm taking my notes also helps to focus for longer periods of time and have a better quality time while studying. This way I find it easier to stay for longer periods of time and to be engaged in what you are actually writing. Let's also not forget, on paper you are not bound to any UI. You can write down your notes in any way, shape or form you want. You can even write your notes upside down and you would be able to do so. This in itself allows for more creativity rather than the iPad way of note taking. I will not get too carried away with this as it is a never ending discussion. So let's move now for some tips and tricks of note taking itself. If you watched my previous video, you already know I don't have any specific preferences when it comes to pens. Just use any pen that actually works for you. But when it comes to notebooks, just use any notebook that is in a portable form so that it's not a burden to carry it around between lectures or whenever you are on the go. It is also very important to have an organized desk before you start. Make sure to clean it, organize it, and tidy it up. I can never get my mind to study right if I don't have tidied up desk for studying. Also, make sure to leave sufficient space for note taking itself. Before we end this video, there are some important stuff that I still need to tell you about my note taking method. First and foremost, I don't like to start writing if I don't have the date written. I feel like I keep things organized this way and I always can go back to which date I studied to which lecture. This helps me to get back to my stuff in an organized way. Now here on the left side, I always type the topics that I am studying. This lecture itself was about Sjogren disease syndrome, so I've just wrote it here at the top left. A quick review about my note-taking method. Here's the first paragraph I have is just like a brief explanation of what the disease is. And this is usually how I go to the most of my notes that I take. Now about the bullet points, let's say there's a disease that has multiple of characteristics, and I will show you here for this disease in itself. In order to diagnose this disease, you have to know about some antibodies, and these antibodies are the characteristics patient is diseased or not with this syndrome. It is an autoimmune disease, so I need to know about some antibodies that are specific to this disease, so as the anti-ROSSA and the anti-LASSB. Another way I like to keep my notes organized is using of these arrows. I like them as they are neat in my opinion, and they blend well with the notes that I take. See, for example, right here we have the peripheral neuropathy. It comes with numbness and paresthesia. I feel like this way of writing just keeps things organized and in a nice way to go back to. I've also mentioned in the video how I mark stuff down if I want to go back to it. Now here in Sjogren syndrome, it was mentioned in the lecture that increases the risk of lymphoma. I didn't understand it at first, so I want to go back to the lecture itself, and I will probably need to go out to other resources as well, like the book. So I put here this mark. You can put whatever mark you want. You can put a question mark, you can put an X, you can put whatever symbol you want. Now I've also mentioned in the lecture itself that I use the notes to pinpoint important information if I want to go back to the lecture. Like for example, this here, the increase of risk of lymphoma was mentioned in the minute 19 and second 35 of the lecture itself. Now I was able to pinpoint the time because it was a recorded lecture and I had a video of it on YouTube. So it is really useful when you have lectures that are on YouTube, but when it comes to the in-person lectures, rather than putting the time, you can just put the topic or the page of the slides that the professor is teaching at. For example, you can put like slide 19 of the lecture. Other stuff that I have mentioned is that you can write in whatever way you can. As I've also seen, you can write in whatever orientation you can, and usually you can do it by typing, let's say for example on the computer. And this space that I've left here, as you can see, I've put a mark here on this point. So I still have many studying to do for this point. So I leave this space so that when I do my research, I can put it down here and I can put the summary of what I learned in the notes that I've took, so that they are still organized and they are not in different places, so that I can always revise all of the lecture at one point in one place. So here is a rather uncommon note that I took. See, this note wasn't meant really for studying, it was just meant so that I can understand what we are going through in the lecture. As you can see, I've put 3 bullet points, and these I put while I was watching the lecture so that I know which points we have already covered. That if I need to remember some stuff, I know which point we have already learned and which point we are still yet to learn. Not only that, but I also like to number some stuff as well. Let's say there are 3 types of a certain disease or 3 types of a certain growth. I can just type 1, 2, and 3. Now I find when I number stuff down, it is easier to memorize, as you like memorize them in the specific sequence that you've wrote them in, so you always have some other additional information that helps you to memorize stuff. At the end, there is no fixed way to take down notes. Everyone has their own way of understanding, writing, and reading their notes. But just make sure you write down your notes in a way that you will be able to get back to them whenever you need them. So this was it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you in another video.